My name is Alexandra, and 3 months ago, I watched my mother hand over my $50,000 inheritance to my sister for her wedding while telling me I should be grateful she was keeping our family together. What my mother did not know was that I had discovered Grandma's real will hidden in her attic, and the truth was about to destroy everything they thought they knew about family loyalty and financial entitlement. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The call came on a Tuesday evening in September while I was reviewing quarterly reports at my desk in the accounting firm where I had worked for the past 8 years. My mother's voice carried that particular tone of forced cheerfulness that had become her signature whenever she needed to deliver news that would fundamentally alter my life without my consent. Alexandra, darling, I need to discuss something important with you regarding your grandmother's estate, she said, her words carefully measured in a way that immediately raised my suspicions. Could you come over for dinner this Saturday? Your sister will be there too, and we have some wonderful news to share about her upcoming wedding. The mention of my sister Cassandra's wedding in the same breath as my grandmother's estate created an immediate knot of anxiety in my stomach. Grandma Eleanor had passed away 6 months earlier, leaving behind a modest but significant estate that included her house, her savings, and several investment accounts that had grown steadily over her 92 years of careful financial management. The preliminary reading of her will had indicated that Cassandra and I would each receive equal portions of her monetary assets, with the house going to our mother. During the months following Grandma's funeral, my mother had assumed the role of estate executor with an efficiency that surprised me. Given her historically casual approach to financial matters, she had handled the probate process, managed the sale of Grandma's house, and coordinated with the attorneys and financial advisors involved in settling the estate. Her sudden competence in these areas had impressed both Cassandra and me, though I had begun to notice that she deflected most of our questions about specific details with vague reassurances that everything was proceeding according to plan. The dinner invitation felt like a trap, though I could not articulate why. Something in my mother's voice suggested that the conversation we were about to have would not be the routine update on estate proceedings that I had been expecting. The connection she had drawn between the estate and Cassandra's wedding created implications that I preferred not to contemplate. But my professional experience with family financial disputes had taught me to recognize the warning signs of decisions made without proper consultation. I arrived at my childhood home on Saturday evening to find the dining room table set with my mother's best china and silver, a level of formality typically reserved for holidays or special occasions. The elaborate presentation felt like stage, dressing for a performance I had not agreed to participate in, and I found myself analyzing the scene with the same skeptical attention I applied to reviewing financial statements for inconsistencies. Cassandra was already seated at the table, her engagement ring catching the light from the chandelier as she gestured enthusiastically while describing her wedding plans to our mother. At 28, she had inherited our grandmother's delicate features and our father's natural charisma, creating a combination that had served her well in her career as a marketing coordinator for a boutique public relations firm. Her ability to charm clients and colleagues had always been her greatest professional asset, though it had also enabled a pattern of expecting others to solve her problems and finance her ambitions. The wedding she was planning represented the culmination of a year-long engagement to David, a software developer whose steady income and patient personality provided the stability that Cassandra had always lacked. The event she envisioned was elaborate and expensive, featuring a destination ceremony, custom designer dress, and reception for over 200 guests. The estimated cost had grown from an initial budget of $30,000 to something approaching $60,000, a figure that seemed to expand with each conversation about vendors and venue options. My mother had been enthusiastically supportive of Cassandra's wedding plans, offering to contribute to the costs and helping with the extensive planning required for such an elaborate event. Her involvement had seemed generous, but not unusual, given her tendency to prioritize Cassandra's happiness over practical financial considerations. However, the timing of this dinner and the connection my mother had drawn to Grandma's estate suggested that her support might extend beyond her own resources. "Alexandra, I am so glad you could join us tonight," my mother said as I took my seat at the table. "We have been discussing Cassandra's wedding, and I think we have found a wonderful solution to help make her dreams come true." The phrase, "wonderful" solution in connection with my sister's wedding expenses immediately activated my professional instincts for detecting financial irregularities. In my experience, family financial solutions typically involved someone contributing money they had not originally planned to spend, and the presence of estate discussions in the same conversation created obvious implications about the source of those funds. "What kind of solution?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral while my mind began calculating the potential scenarios that could have prompted this dinner invitation. My mother's smile brightened in a way that confirmed my suspicions about the direction of this conversation. "Well, as you know, the estate has been settled, and your grandmother's assets have been distributed according to her wishes. However, I have been thinking about the timing of everything, and I believe there is an opportunity to help Cassandra with her wedding in a way that would make your grandmother very happy." The careful phrasing of her statement raised immediate red flags. The estate had not been fully settled as far as I knew, and I had not received any distributions from Grandma's monetary assets. My understanding was that the final accounting was still being completed, and that distributions would be made once all debts and expenses had been resolved. The suggestion that assets had already been distributed directly contradicted the information I had received from the estate attorney just 2 weeks earlier. "I thought the estate was still in probate," I said, my accounting training compelling me to seek clarification on the discrepancy between my mother's statement and my understanding of the situation. "Oh, the paperwork has been completed much faster than we expected," my mother replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. "The attorney was able to expedite everything, and we now have access to your grandmother's savings and investment accounts, which brings me to the exciting part of our conversation." She paused dramatically, looking between Cassandra and me with the expression of someone preparing to deliver news she expected would be received with gratitude and excitement. "I have decided to give Cassandra's inheritance to her now, rather than waiting for the final distribution so she can use it for her wedding. $50,000 should be more than enough to cover all of her expenses and give her the celebration she deserves." The words hit me like a physical blow, though I managed to maintain my composure while my mind processed the implications of what she had just announced. My mother had decided to give Cassandra $50,000 from the estate for her wedding, referring to it as Cassandra's inheritance, in a way that suggested the decision had already been made without consulting me or considering my own inheritance rights. "What about my inheritance?" I asked, the question emerging with more sharpness than I had intended. My mother's expression shifted slightly, revealing a hint of the defensive irritation that had always appeared when her decisions were questioned. "Well, darling, you have a good job and a stable income. You do not need the money right now the way Cassandra does. Besides, weddings are once-in-a-lifetime events, and I think your grandmother would want us to prioritize family celebrations over individual financial gain." The rationalization was breathtaking in its audacity and its complete disregard for the legal and ethical principles governing estate distribution. My mother had unilaterally decided to redirect my inheritance to my sister, based on her personal assessment of our respective financial needs and her interpretation of what our deceased grandmother would have wanted. The decision revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of inheritance law and a casual disregard for my rights as a beneficiary. "Mom, that is not how inheritance works," I said, my professional training overriding my shock at her announcement. "The estate assets are supposed to be distributed according to the will, not according to your personal opinions about who needs the money more." My mother's defensive irritation intensified, creating the familiar family dynamic where questioning her decisions was treated as a personal attack rather than a legitimate concern about fairness and legality. I am the executor of the estate, Alexandra, and I have the authority to make decisions about distributions. I have decided that giving Cassandra her inheritance now is the best way to honor your grandmother's memory and support our family. The conversation had revealed the fundamental problem with my mother's approach to estate management. She had conflated her role as executor with ownership of the estate assets, assuming that her administrative authority gave her the right to make unilateral decisions about distributions based on her personal preferences rather than legal requirements. Her decision to characterize the $50,000 as Cassandra's inheritance suggested that she had mentally reclassified the entire estate as belonging to my sister, eliminating my inheritance rights through simple declaration. Cassandra had remained silent throughout this exchange, her expression shifting between excitement about the wedding funding and discomfort about the family conflict that was developing around her financial benefit. Her silence represented either complicity in my mother's decision or an unwillingness to advocate for fairness that would reduce her own financial advantage. "I need to see the will," I said, my accounting instincts demanding documentation to verify the legal foundation for my mother's decisions. I need to understand exactly what Grandma specified about inheritance distribution and timing. My mother's reaction to this request revealed the weakness in her position. Her immediate defensiveness and attempts to dismiss the importance of reviewing the will suggested that she knew her decisions could not withstand legal scrutiny. "The will is just a formality, Alexandra. What matters is doing what is best for our family right now." The dismissal of the will as just a formality confirmed my suspicions that my mother had exceeded her authority as executor and was making decisions based on personal preference rather than legal obligation. Her refusal to provide documentation suggested that she was aware of the problems with her approach, but was hoping to avoid scrutiny through family pressure and emotional manipulation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That evening, as I drove home from my childhood house, I realized that my mother's betrayal represented more than just financial theft. She had used her position of trust as executor to redistribute family assets according to her own priorities, while expecting me to accept the decision without question or complaint. The fundamental violation of inheritance law was compounded by the assumption that my financial stability made me less deserving of my grandmother's legacy than my sister's wedding expenses. The situation required immediate action to protect my legal rights and ensure proper distribution of the estate assets. However, I also recognized that challenging my mother's decisions would likely create permanent damage to our family relationships. The choice between accepting financial injustice and fighting for legal fairness would define not only my inheritance rights, but also my future relationship with my mother and sister. As I sat in my apartment that night, staring at the city lights through my window, I realized that my grandmother's death had revealed fundamental problems in my family's dynamics that extended far beyond estate distribution. My mother's willingness to violate inheritance law for my sister's benefit demonstrated a pattern of favoritism that had probably influenced family decisions for years. The question was whether I had the courage to confront this pattern and demand the fairness that had been denied to me for so long. The decision to fight for my inheritance would require me to challenge not just my mother's financial decisions, but the entire family dynamic that had allowed such decisions to occur without question. It was a battle that would test my resolve, my relationships, and my commitment to principles of fairness and legal integrity. The $50,000 represented more than money. It represented my grandmother's recognition of my worth and my right to be treated with the same respect and consideration as my sister. The next morning, I began the process that would change everything, starting with a phone call to the estate attorney to request copies of all documents related to my grandmother's will and the distribution of her assets. The battle for my inheritance was about to begin, and I had no intention of accepting defeat without a fight that would reveal the truth about my family's priorities and my grandmother's actual wishes. The estate attorney's office occupied the 15th floor of a downtown building that had seen better decades, its wood-paneled walls and worn carpet reflecting the kind of established legal practice that handled routine matters like wills and probate with methodical precision. Attorney Margaret Thornfield had been practicing estate law for 37 years, and her reputation for thoroughness made her the natural choice when my grandmother had updated her will 5 years earlier. I arrived for our appointment on Saturday's Monday morning with a manila folder containing every document I had received regarding my grandmother's estate, along with a detailed list of questions about the distribution process and my mother's authority as executor. The weekend following the dinner revelation had been spent researching inheritance law and estate administration, preparing myself with the knowledge necessary to understand exactly what legal violations had occurred. Mrs. Thornfield greeted me with the measured professionalism of someone accustomed to handling family disputes over money and inheritance. Her office was organized with the precision that suggested decades of managing complex financial situations, and I found myself appreciating the environment of competence and order that contrasted sharply with the chaos my mother had created through her unauthorized decisions. "Miss Hamilton, I understand you have questions about your grandmother's estate distribution," she said, settling behind her desk with a thick file that contained the complete documentation of Grandma Eleanor's final wishes. "I must say, I have been concerned about some irregularities in the administration process, and I am pleased that you have requested this meeting." The phrase irregularities in the administration process confirmed my suspicions that my mother's actions had violated proper estate management protocols. Mrs. Thornfield's willingness to discuss these concerns suggested that the problems extended beyond my personal grievances to include potential legal violations that could affect the validity of any distributions that had already been made. My mother informed me this weekend that she has given my sister $50,000 from the estate for her wedding expenses, I explained, watching Mrs. Thornfield's expression carefully for her reaction to this information. She characterized this as Cassandra's inheritance and suggested that the estate has been fully settled. Mrs. Thornfield's professional composure faltered slightly, revealing a flash of the kind of controlled anger that estate attorneys reserve for executors who abuse their fiduciary responsibilities. She opened the file in front of her and began reviewing documents with the focused attention of someone confirming the details of a serious problem. "Miss Hamilton, I need to inform you that no distributions have been authorized from your grandmother's estate," she said, her voice carrying the weight of legal authority that my mother had attempted to claim for herself. "The probate process is still ongoing, and I have not prepared any distribution documents or authorized any transfers of estate assets to beneficiaries." The confirmation that no legitimate distributions had occurred meant that my mother had accessed estate accounts without proper authorization, essentially stealing inheritance money to fund my sister's wedding. The magnitude of the financial violation was staggering, representing not just theft, but a fundamental breach of the fiduciary duty that executors owe to estate beneficiaries. "How did she get access to the money?" I asked, my accounting background compelling me to understand the mechanics of the financial fraud that had occurred. Mrs. Thornfield's explanation revealed a pattern of deception that extended back several months. My mother had used her position as executor to gain access to estate bank accounts, then had made unauthorized withdrawals while providing false documentation to financial institutions about the status of probate proceedings. The complexity of her scheme suggested premeditation rather than impulsive decision-making. "Your mother provided forged distribution orders to the banks holding your grandmother's accounts," Mrs. Thornfield explained, her professional demeanor unable to completely mask her disapproval of the criminal behavior she was describing. "She created false documentation suggesting that I had authorized immediate distributions to beneficiaries, when in fact no such authorization had been given." The revelation that my mother had committed forgery in addition to theft transformed the situation from a family financial dispute into a criminal matter with serious legal consequences. Her willingness to create false documents and deceive financial institutions demonstrated a level of desperation and dishonesty that shocked me. despite my growing awareness of her willingness to violate my inheritance rights. Mrs. Thornfield continued reviewing the file, her expression growing more serious as she absorbed the full scope of the unauthorized actions that had been taken in the name of estate administration. "There is another matter we need to discuss, Miss Hamilton, and it relates to the will itself. Your grandmother made some significant changes to her estate plan in the months before her death, and I am not certain that your mother has informed you about these modifications." The mention of will modifications created a new dimension of concern about what other information my mother had concealed in her efforts to control estate distribution. Mrs. Thornfield's careful phrasing suggested that the changes were substantial and potentially relevant to my inheritance rights in ways that my mother had chosen not to disclose. "What kind of changes?" I asked, though I suspected that the answer would reveal additional layers of deception in my mother's handling of estate matters. Mrs. Thornfield opened a separate section of the file and withdrew a document that appeared to be more recent than the will I had seen read at the preliminary hearing following my grandmother's funeral. The paper was crisp and official, bearing multiple signatures and notarization stamps that indicated formal legal execution. "Your grandmother executed a codicil to her will 8 months before her death," Mrs. Thornfield explained, referring to the legal document that allows modifications to existing wills without requiring complete rewriting. "This codicil made substantial changes to the distribution of her monetary assets, specifically increasing your inheritance while reducing other bequests. The information about a codicil that increased my inheritance while reducing other bequests suggested that my grandmother had recognized something about family dynamics that had prompted her to adjust her estate plan in my favor. The timing of the modification, occurring just 8 months before her death, indicated that recent events or observations had influenced her decision to alter the original distribution scheme. The codicil specifies that you are to receive $75,000 from your grandmother's savings and investment accounts," Mrs. Thornfield continued, "while your sister's inheritance is reduced to $25,000. Your grandmother also included a provision requiring that these distributions be made within 90 days of the completion of probate, with specific penalties for any executor who delays or interferes with the intended distributions. The revelation that my actual inheritance was $75,000, rather than the $50,000 that my mother had given to my sister, transformed the scope of the financial theft that had occurred. My mother had not only stolen my inheritance to fund Cassandra's wedding, but had stolen an amount that exceeded even the inflated figure she had given away, demonstrating a level of financial violation that bordered on the surreal. More significantly, the codicil's specific provisions about distribution timing and executor interference suggested that my grandmother had anticipated potential problems with estate administration and had attempted to protect my inheritance rights through explicit legal requirements. Her prescience about family conflicts over money indicated a level of understanding about our relationships that I had not fully appreciated while she was alive. Why was the codicil not mentioned at the preliminary will reading? I asked, recognizing that my mother's failure to disclose material modifications to the estate plan represented another violation of her fiduciary responsibilities. Mrs. Thornfield's explanation revealed the depth of my mother's deception in handling estate matters. Your mother requested that I postpone discussion of the codicil until the final distribution meeting, claiming that she wanted to handle the communication about inheritance changes within the family first. I agreed to this request because executors sometimes prefer to manage family communications about inheritance matters personally. The realization that my mother had specifically requested concealment of the codicil demonstrated premeditation in her scheme to redirect inheritance money to my sister. She had known about the modifications to my grandmother's will that increased my inheritance, yet had chosen to steal that money for Cassandra's wedding while allowing me to believe that I was entitled to a smaller amount. Mrs. Thornfield continued, explaining the legal implications of the codicil and my mother's violations of its requirements. The penalties for executor interference that your grandmother included in the codicil are quite severe. Any executor who fails to distribute assets according to the specified timeline or who redirects inheritance money without proper authorization is personally liable for the full amount of any losses, plus interest and legal fees. The penalty provisions meant that my mother was legally obligated to restore my full inheritance amount, regardless of how she had spent the money or what financial hardship the restoration might create for her personally. My grandmother had anticipated potential executor misconduct and had created legal mechanisms to ensure that her wishes would be enforced even against resistant or dishonest administrators. As Mrs. Thornfield explained the various legal remedies available for addressing executor misconduct, I began to understand that my situation extended far beyond a simple family financial dispute. My mother had committed multiple criminal violations, including forgery, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty, while attempting to permanently redirect inheritance money that my grandmother had specifically intended for me. The weight of this knowledge created a profound sense of responsibility that extended beyond my personal financial interests. Mrs. Thornfield explained that failure to address executor misconduct could set precedents that encouraged similar violations in other estates, potentially affecting other families who might face comparable situations with dishonest administrators. Miss Hamilton, I need to inform you that this situation requires immediate legal action to protect both your inheritance rights and the integrity of the estate administration process, Mrs. Thornfield said, her professional obligation compelling her to recommend decisive intervention. Your mother's actions constitute serious criminal violations that cannot be resolved through family discussions or informal agreements. The attorney's recommendation for immediate legal action forced me to confront the reality that protecting my inheritance would require treating my mother as the criminal she had become through her theft and deception. The family relationships that had shaped my entire life would be fundamentally altered by the legal proceedings necessary to recover my grandmother's intended bequest. During the drive home from Mrs. Thornfield's office, I found myself grappling with the psychological burden of possessing knowledge that would destroy my family's carefully constructed facade of harmony and mutual support. The information I had gained created an obligation to act, but also guaranteed that taking action would create permanent rifts in relationships that had defined my identity and social support system. The codicil represented my grandmother's final attempt to ensure fairness in family financial matters, suggesting that she had observed the same patterns of favoritism and inequity that had characterized my mother's treatment of Cassandra and me throughout our lives. Her decision to increase my inheritance while reducing my sister's reflected an understanding of family dynamics that extended beyond simple monetary distribution to questions of justice and recognition. That evening, as I sat in my apartment, reviewing the documentation that Mrs. Thornfield had provided, I realized that my grandmother had left me more than money. She had left me the legal tools necessary to challenge the family patterns that had always privileged my sister's immediate desires over my long-term welfare. The codicil was not just an inheritance modification, but a final gift of empowerment from someone who had understood the inequities I faced. The burden of this knowledge weighed heavily as I considered the choices that lay ahead. I could pursue legal action to recover my inheritance and ensure that my mother faced consequences for her criminal behavior. Or I could accept the financial loss and maintain family relationships built on deception and inequality. The decision would define not only my financial future, but my willingness to stand up for principles of fairness and legal integrity. The hidden knowledge I now possessed had transformed me from a victim of family favoritism into someone with the power to demand justice and accountability. The question was whether I had the courage to use that power, knowing that doing so would irreversibly change every relationship that had shaped my life. The weight of discovery had become the weight of responsibility, and the choices I made in the coming days would determine whether my grandmother's final wishes would be honored or buried beneath the family dynamics that had always favored my sister over me. The revelation of my grandmother's true intentions through the codicil created a profound shift in my understanding of family relationships and moral obligations that extended far beyond the immediate financial theft. During the sleepless nights, following my meeting with Mrs. Thornfield, I found myself reconstructing decades of family interactions through the lens of systematic favoritism and financial manipulation that had culminated in this brazen act of inheritance fraud. The pattern became unmistakably clear as I reviewed years of family decisions that had consistently prioritized Cassandra's immediate desires over long-term fairness or my legitimate interests. The inheritance theft represented not an isolated incident of poor judgment, but the logical conclusion of a lifetime of unequal treatment that my mother had normalized through careful manipulation of family narratives and expectations. During my childhood, Cassandra's academic struggles had been met with expensive tutoring and private educational support, while my academic achievements were dismissed as natural talent that required no additional investment or recognition. Her failed business ventures in college had been subsidized through family loans that were never repaid, while my requests for assistance with graduate school expenses had been declined due to budget constraints that mysteriously disappeared when my sister needed financial support. The wedding funding represented the most expensive example of this pattern, but it was built upon decades of smaller decisions that had established my mother's willingness to sacrifice my interests for Cassandra's benefit. The systematic nature of this favoritism suggested that my mother viewed our family as a zero-sum system where supporting one daughter necessarily required diminishing the other, with the predetermined outcome that Cassandra would always receive priority consideration. My grandmother's codicil represented her recognition of these family dynamics and her final attempt to restore balance through explicit legal requirements that could not be circumvented through emotional manipulation or family pressure. The increase in my inheritance from $50,000 to $75,000 reflected her understanding that I had been systematically disadvantaged throughout my life and deserved compensation for years of unequal treatment. The timing of the codicil execution, occurring just 8 months before her death, suggested that specific events had prompted my grandmother to modify her estate plan in response to observed patterns of family favoritism. Her decision to include severe penalties for executor interference indicated prescient awareness that my mother might attempt to circumvent her wishes through abuse of administrative authority. As I contemplated the implications of my grandmother's final gift, I began to understand that the codicil represented more than financial compensation. It constituted a moral imperative to stand up against the family patterns that had shaped my entire life, demanding that I choose between accepting continued inequity and fighting for the justice that my grandmother had tried to ensure through legal means. The psychological burden of this realization was immense. Pursuing legal action against my mother would require me to publicly acknowledge the criminal nature of her behavior, while accepting that family relationships built on deception and favoritism were fundamentally unsustainable. The comfortable fiction of family harmony would be destroyed, replaced by the uncomfortable truth of systematic exploitation disguised as maternal love. However, the alternative to legal action carried moral implications that I found increasingly unacceptable. Allowing my mother to steal $75,000 without consequences would validate her approach to family financial management, while encouraging similar violations in the future. My silence would become complicity in a system that prioritized my sister's immediate gratification over fundamental principles of fairness and legal integrity. The catalyst for my moral awakening came during a conversation with my colleague Jennifer Martinez, a fellow accountant whose expertise in forensic financial analysis had helped several clients recover assets stolen by family members who had abused positions of financial trust. Her experience in similar cases provided perspective on the broader implications of inheritance fraud and the importance of holding perpetrators accountable for their criminal behavior. Alexandra, what your mother has done extends far beyond stealing your inheritance, Jennifer explained during our lunch meeting at a downtown restaurant where we could discuss the situation privately. She has committed multiple felonies, including forgery, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. These are serious crimes that affect not just your family, but the broader integrity of estate administration systems. Jennifer's professional perspective helped me understand that my situation was not merely a personal family dispute, but part of a broader pattern of inheritance fraud that required decisive legal intervention to protect other potential victims. Her forensic work had revealed numerous cases where family members had exploited positions of trust to steal inheritance money, often targeting the most responsible and least confrontational beneficiaries who were unlikely to pursue aggressive legal remedies. The perpetrators of these crimes rely on family loyalty and emotional manipulation to avoid accountability, she continued. They count on their victims prioritizing family harmony over financial justice, which enables them to steal inheritance money with minimal risk of consequences. Your decision about how to respond will determine whether your mother faces accountability or continues this pattern of financial abuse. The conversation with Jennifer crystallized my understanding that pursuing justice in my case would serve broader social purposes beyond recovering my stolen inheritance. Estate fraud thrives in environments where victims prioritize family relationships over legal accountability, creating systems that protect perpetrators at the expense of legitimate beneficiaries and the integrity of inheritance law. My grandmother's codicil had provided me with unusually strong legal tools for fighting inheritance fraud, including specific penalties for executor misconduct and clear documentation of her intended distributions. Her foresight in creating these protections suggested that she understood the importance of enabling me to pursue justice even against family members who had violated their fiduciary responsibilities. The moral awakening extended beyond questions about my mother's criminal behavior to encompass broader themes about personal agency and the courage required to challenge established family dynamics. Throughout my adult life, I had accepted unequal treatment as the price of maintaining family harmony, accommodating patterns of favoritism that had systematically disadvantaged me while benefiting my sister. The inheritance theft represented the culmination of these patterns, demonstrating that accommodation and compromise had not protected me from exploitation, but had actually enabled increasingly brazen violations of fairness and legality. My mother's willingness to commit multiple felonies to fund my sister's wedding revealed the true extent of her disregard for my rights and interests. As I reflected on the decades of family interactions that had led to this moment, I began to recognize that my professional competence and financial independence had actually made me a more attractive target for inheritance fraud. My mother assumed that my stable income and career success made me less deserving of inheritance money than my sister, whose financial instability justified redirecting assets intended for me. This logic revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of inheritance law and family equity that reflected broader social attitudes about financial need versus legal entitlement. The assumption that successful family members should sacrifice their inheritance rights to support less successful relatives creates systems that punish achievement while rewarding financial irresponsibility. My grandmother's codicil rejected these assumptions by increasing my inheritance specifically because she recognized my consistent responsibility and achievement. Her decision to reduce Cassandra's inheritance while increasing mine reflected an understanding that fairness sometimes requires unequal distributions to compensate for historical patterns of unequal treatment. The psychological transformation, from victim to empowered advocate, required me to reconceptualize my identity within family relationships and broader social systems. Rather than accepting the role of the responsible daughter who accommodates others' needs at the expense of her own interests, I began to recognize my legitimate right to demand fairness and accountability from family members who had violated their obligations. The process of moral awakening involved recognizing that my professional expertise in financial matters provided me with unique capabilities for challenging inheritance fraud and holding perpetrators accountable for their criminal behavior. My accounting background enabled me to understand the technical aspects of estate administration, while my career success provided the financial resources necessary to pursue extended legal proceedings. These advantages created moral obligations that extended beyond my personal interests to encompass broader responsibilities for protecting other potential victims of similar crimes. My ability to pursue justice despite the financial and emotional costs involved made my response to inheritance fraud a matter of social responsibility rather than merely personal preference. The decision to pursue legal action began to crystallize as I understood that my grandmother's codicil represented not just financial compensation, but a mandate for challenging the family systems that had enabled decades of unequal treatment. Her final gift included both the resources and the legal authority necessary to demand accountability from family members who had violated their fiduciary responsibilities. The awakening of justice consciousness transformed my perspective on family loyalty, from blind accommodation to principled accountability. True family loyalty required holding members responsible for their actions while protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation and abuse. My mother's criminal behavior represented a fundamental violation of family trust that could not be resolved through continued accommodation or emotional manipulation. As I prepared to take decisive action to recover my stolen inheritance and ensure accountability for the crimes that had been committed, I realized that my grandmother had provided me with more than financial resources. She had given me the opportunity to break generational patterns of favoritism and inequality while establishing precedents for fairness and legal integrity that could influence family relationships for years to come. The catalyst for moral awakening had revealed that the inheritance theft was not merely about money, but about fundamental questions of justice, family equity, and personal agency. The choices I made in response to this crisis would define not only my financial future, but my willingness to stand up for principles that transcended individual interests to encompass broader social responsibilities. The decision to pursue legal action against my mother required confronting the devastating reality that protecting my inheritance would fundamentally alter every family relationship that had shaped my identity and provided emotional security throughout my adult life. The choice between financial justice and family harmony presented a false dichotomy that reflected the toxic dynamics my grandmother had recognized and attempted to address through her codicil modifications. My first consideration involved the impact on my relationship with my father, Robert Hamilton, whose position as the family mediator and peacekeeper had enabled many of the inequitable patterns that had culminated in this inheritance theft. Dad had always maintained his role as the neutral party who sought compromise and avoided confrontation, viewing family discord as a problem to be managed rather than a symptom of deeper systemic issues requiring resolution. Throughout my childhood and adult life, Dad had consistently encouraged me to accommodate Cassandra's needs and forgive my mother's favoritism in the interest of maintaining family unity. His approach to conflict resolution involved convincing the more reasonable party to accept unfair outcomes rather than addressing the underlying behaviors that created recurring problems. This pattern had trained me to prioritize family harmony over personal justice, while enabling increasingly serious violations of fairness and equity. The inheritance theft represented the logical conclusion of these dynamics, demonstrating that my willingness to accept unequal treatment had not protected family relationships but had actually encouraged more brazen violations of my rights and interests. Dad's response to my mother's criminal behavior would reveal whether his commitment to family unity extended to protecting criminal activity, or whether he possessed the moral courage to support accountability and justice. My preliminary conversation with Dad about the inheritance situation revealed the depth of his investment in maintaining family facades regardless of the underlying reality. When I explained that my mother had stolen $75,000 from my inheritance to fund Cassandra's wedding, his immediate response focused on finding ways to minimize the conflict rather than addressing the criminal nature of her actions. Alexandra, I understand you are upset about the money, but we need to think about what is best for our family as a whole, he said, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had perfected the art of avoiding difficult conversations. Your mother made a decision that she believed would benefit everyone. and I think we should try to work together to find a solution that does not tear our family apart. The characterization of inheritance theft as a decision that my mother believed would benefit everyone revealed Dad's fundamental misunderstanding of both criminal law and family equity. His suggestion that we needed to find a solution that avoided family conflict demonstrated his willingness to prioritize surface harmony over addressing serious criminal violations that had permanently altered the family financial landscape. His response confirmed that pursuing legal action would likely result in losing my relationship with my father, whose identity as the family mediator required him to oppose any action that acknowledged the irreconcilable nature of our family conflicts. Dad's commitment to maintaining unity would position him as an opponent of accountability and justice, forcing me to choose between recovering my stolen inheritance and preserving a relationship built on denial and accommodation. The consideration of extended family relationships added another dimension of complexity to my decision-making process. My grandmother's sister, Aunt Patricia, had maintained close relationships with both my mother and me throughout the years, serving as a confidant and advisor who had often provided perspective on family dynamics that my parents preferred to ignore or minimize. Aunt Patricia's response to the inheritance situation would likely influence other family members, and could provide crucial support during the legal proceedings that would follow my decision to pursue justice. Her understanding of my grandmother's intentions and her knowledge of family financial history made her a potentially valuable ally in efforts to recover my stolen inheritance and hold my mother accountable for her criminal behavior. My conversation with Aunt Patricia revealed the extent to which family members had been aware of the favoritism patterns that had shaped my relationship with my mother, while feeling powerless to intervene effectively. Her response to my explanation of the inheritance theft demonstrated both outrage at my mother's criminal behavior and relief that someone was finally prepared to challenge the family dynamics that had enabled years of unequal treatment. Alexandra, I have watched your mother favor Cassandra for years, and I have always hoped that someone would stand up to her and demand fairness, Aunt Patricia said during our phone conversation. Your grandmother was deeply concerned about these patterns, and she specifically mentioned to me that she was modifying her will to ensure that you received fair treatment after her death. The confirmation that my grandmother had discussed her concerns about family favoritism with other relatives provided additional validation for my decision to pursue legal action, while revealing that the inheritance theft had been anticipated by family members who understood the underlying dynamics. Aunt Patricia's support would provide emotional encouragement and potentially valuable testimony about my grandmother's intentions if legal proceedings required evidence about the codicil modifications. However, the most challenging aspect of my decision involved considering the impact on my relationship with Cassandra, whose complicity in the inheritance theft created a moral and emotional complexity that extended beyond simple sibling rivalry. My sister's willingness to accept stolen inheritance money for her wedding expenses revealed either a stunning lack of awareness about the source of the funds or a callous disregard for the harm her financial benefit had caused to my interests. The question of Cassandra's knowledge about the inheritance theft became crucial for determining how to approach our relationship during the legal proceedings that would follow my decision to pursue justice. If she had been unaware that the wedding funding came from my stolen inheritance, her position as an innocent beneficiary might allow for eventual reconciliation after the legal issues were resolved. However, if she had knowingly accepted stolen money, her complicity in the criminal activity would make our relationship irreparable. My analysis of Cassandra's behavior during the dinner announcement suggested that she had been aware of the problematic nature of the funding arrangement, but had chosen to prioritize her wedding expenses over questions about fairness and legality. Her silence during my mother's explanation of the inheritance redistribution and her subsequent acceptance of the $50,000 without questioning its source indicated either willful ignorance or active complicity in the theft. The prospect of permanently losing my relationship with my sister created profound emotional pain that complicated my decision-making process. Despite the favoritism patterns that had shaped our childhood and adult interactions, Cassandra remained my only sibling and the person who shared my family history and childhood memories. The inheritance theft threatened to destroy not only our current relationship, but also the possibility of future reconciliation and shared family experiences. However, the moral implications of allowing my sister to retain stolen inheritance, money without accountability, extended beyond personal relationship considerations to encompass broader questions about enabling criminal behavior and rewarding financial irresponsibility. Cassandra's retention of the $75,000 would validate the family dynamics that had consistently prioritized her immediate desires over long-term fairness and legal integrity. The financial implications of pursuing legal action required careful consideration of the costs and benefits associated with recovering my stolen inheritance through formal legal proceedings. Mrs. Thornfield had explained that estate litigation could be expensive and time-consuming, with attorney fees and court costs potentially consuming a significant portion of any recovered assets. However, the codicil provisions that required my mother to pay legal fees and interest penalties for executor misconduct would likely offset most of the litigation expenses. The professional implications of pursuing legal action against my mother also required evaluation, particularly regarding the potential impact on my career and reputation within the accounting profession. My colleagues and clients would likely become aware of the family legal proceedings, creating the possibility that my professional credibility could be affected by association with criminal activity, even as the victim rather than the perpetrator. However, my conversation with Jennifer Martinez had provided reassurance that pursuing justice against inheritance fraud would likely enhance rather than damage my professional reputation. Her experience with similar cases suggested that accountants who demonstrated the courage to challenge financial crimes, even when committed by family members, typically gained respect within the profession for their commitment to ethical principles and legal integrity. The psychological preparation for pursuing legal action required acknowledging that the family relationships I had known throughout my life would be fundamentally altered by the process of holding my mother accountable for her criminal behavior. The comfortable illusions of family harmony and mutual support would be replaced by the uncomfortable reality of systematic favoritism and criminal exploitation disguised as maternal love. This transformation would require developing new sources of emotional support and social connection to replace the family relationships that would be damaged or destroyed by my decision to pursue justice. The process of building alternative support systems would be challenging, but ultimately liberating, allowing me to establish relationships based on mutual respect and shared values rather than accommodation and compromise. The moral courage required to pursue legal action against my mother involved accepting that true family loyalty sometimes requires holding members accountable for their actions rather than enabling continued violations of trust and legality. My grandmother's codicil had provided both the financial resources and the moral authority necessary to challenge family patterns that had persisted for decades without effective intervention. As I prepared to make the final decision about pursuing legal action, I realized that my choice would define not only my financial future, but my willingness to stand up for principles that transcended individual interests to encompass broader social responsibilities. The price of truth would be high, involving the loss of family relationships and the disruption of comfortable assumptions about family loyalty and mutual support. However, the alternative to pursuing justice carried moral costs that I found increasingly unacceptable. Allowing my mother to steal $75,000 without consequences would validate her criminal behavior while encouraging similar violations against other family members or beneficiaries. My silence would become complicity in a system that rewarded theft and deception while punishing honesty and accountability. The price of truth was substantial, but the cost of continued accommodation was ultimately higher, involving the permanent sacrifice of my financial security and moral integrity to maintain relationships built on deception and inequality. Maiutiu. Grandmother's final gift had provided me with the opportunity to choose justice over accommodation, and I was prepared to accept the consequences of that choice. The transformation from victim of inheritance fraud to strategic advocate for justice required systematic preparation that would demonstrate my professional competence while building an unassailable legal case against my mother's criminal behavior. The decision to pursue legal action had crystallized over several sleepless nights of moral deliberation, but the implementation of that decision demanded methodical planning that would maximize the likelihood of success while minimizing opportunities for opposition or retaliation. My first strategic priority involved securing comprehensive documentation of all financial transactions related to my grandmother's estate, particularly the unauthorized withdrawals that my mother had executed to fund Cassandra's wedding expenses. This documentation would serve as the foundation for both criminal charges and civil recovery proceedings, providing irrefutable evidence of the theft and forgery that had occurred under the guise of estate administration. Mrs. Thornfield had provided initial documentation during our meeting, but comprehensive case preparation required obtaining detailed banking records, financial statements, and transaction histories that would reveal the full scope of my mother's unauthorized activities. The process of securing this information would involve formal requests to multiple financial institutions, coordinated through legal channels that would preserve the evidentiary value of the materials for court proceedings. The banking records revealed a pattern of deception that extended far beyond the simple theft of inheritance money for wedding expenses. My mother had systematically accessed estate accounts over a period of several months, making smaller withdrawals that had avoided triggering institutional oversight, while accumulating substantial unauthorized distributions that totaled nearly $90,000 rather than the $75,000 specified in the codicil. The discrepancy between the amount stolen and the amount distributed to Cassandra suggested that my mother had retained $15,000 for her own purposes, transforming the inheritance theft from a misguided attempt to support my sister into a broader pattern of criminal embezzlement that had personally enriched the estate executor. This additional theft elevated the criminal charges that could be pursued while demonstrating the systematic nature of her financial misconduct. My analysis of the banking records also revealed that my mother had used sophisticated methods to conceal her unauthorized activities, including the creation of false documentation and the manipulation of account statements to hide the true extent of her withdrawals. The complexity of her deception suggested premeditation and criminal intent that extended far beyond impulsive decision-making or misunderstanding of executor responsibilities. The forensic accounting analysis that I conducted using my professional expertise revealed additional irregularities in estate administration that could support broader charges of fiduciary misconduct and criminal mismanagement. My mother had charged excessive fees for estate administration services, inflated expenses for routine legal and financial tasks, and redirected investment income that should have been preserved for beneficiary distributions. These additional violations demonstrated a pattern of systematic exploitation that had converted my mother's position as estate executor into a mechanism for personal enrichment at the expense of legitimate beneficiaries. The scope of her misconduct extended far beyond the inheritance theft that had initially prompted my investigation, revealing criminal activity that warranted serious legal consequences regardless of family relationships or emotional considerations. The evidence compilation process required coordinating with multiple professional service providers who had been involved in estate administration, including attorneys, accountants, financial advisors, and banking representatives who could provide testimony about standard practices and regulatory requirements. Each of these professionals had observed aspects of my mother's misconduct that would contribute to the comprehensive case documentation necessary for successful prosecution. My relationship with Jennifer Martinez proved invaluable during this evidence-gathering phase, as her expertise in forensic accounting provided guidance on the technical aspects of documenting financial crimes, while her experience with similar cases offered strategic insights about effective prosecution approaches. Her professional network included investigators and attorneys who specialized in estate fraud cases and could provide additional resources for building the strongest possible legal foundation. The strategic development of witness testimony required identifying family members, friends, and professional associates who had observed relevant aspects of my mother's behavior or who possessed knowledge about my grandmother's actual intentions regarding inheritance distribution. Aunt Patricia emerged as a crucial witness whose conversations with my grandmother about the codicil modifications would provide compelling evidence about the intended distribution of estate assets. The witness preparation process also involved documenting my own interactions with my mother regarding estate administration, including the dinner conversation where she had announced the unauthorized distribution to Cassandra and her subsequent attempts to justify the theft through emotional manipulation and false claims about my grandmother's wishes. These interactions would demonstrate her awareness of the criminal nature of her actions, while revealing the calculated deception involved in her approach to inheritance fraud. The legal strategy development required coordination with Mrs. Thornfield to determine the most effective combination of criminal charges and civil remedies that would ensure both accountability for my mother's criminal behavior and complete recovery of my stolen inheritance. The codicil provisions that specified penalties for executor misconduct provided unusually strong legal tools for pursuing comprehensive remedies that extended beyond simple asset recovery to include punitive damages and legal fees. The criminal charges that could be pursued included theft, forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, and criminal mismanagement of estate assets, each carrying potential penalties that reflected the serious nature of the violations that had occurred. The civil remedies available included complete restitution of stolen assets, payment of interest and penalties specified in the codicil, recovery of legal fees and court costs, and removal of my mother from her position as estate executor. The coordination of criminal and civil proceedings required careful timing to ensure that the different legal processes would reinforce rather than conflict with each other. The evidence developed for criminal prosecution would support civil recovery efforts, while the civil proceedings would provide additional documentation and testimony that could strengthen criminal charges against my mother. The strategic consideration of potential settlement opportunities required analyzing whether my mother might prefer to resolve the situation through negotiated agreement rather than facing the public exposure and legal consequences of formal court proceedings. However, the systematic nature of her criminal behavior and the substantial amount of money involved suggested that comprehensive legal action would be necessary to achieve full accountability and recovery. The preparation for family confrontation required developing communication strategies that would maintain my professional credibility while clearly articulating the criminal nature of my mother's behavior and my commitment to pursuing justice, regardless of family relationships or emotional pressure. This preparation involved anticipating the various arguments and manipulative tactics that she might employ to avoid accountability while maintaining focus on the legal and moral principles that justified my actions. The psychological preparation for extended legal proceedings required building resilience and support systems that would sustain me through months of litigation while managing the emotional stress of family conflict and public exposure. This preparation included identifying professional counseling resources, building networks of supportive colleagues and friends, and developing stress management techniques that would preserve my mental health during challenging periods. Financial planning for litigation expenses required analyzing the potential costs of extended legal proceedings, while evaluating the resources available for pursuing comprehensive justice. The codicil provisions that required my mother to pay legal fees and penalties for executor misconduct would likely cover most litigation expenses, but initial funding would be necessary to initiate proceedings and maintain momentum during the early phases of legal action. The professional preparation involved informing key colleagues and supervisors about the family legal situation in ways that would maintain my credibility while preventing potential conflicts of interest or ethical concerns related to my involvement in high-profile litigation. This communication required balancing transparency about the situation with appropriate boundaries regarding confidential family information. The documentation organization required creating comprehensive files that would support efficient case management while ensuring that crucial evidence remained secure and accessible throughout extended legal proceedings. This organization involved both physical document management and digital security measures that would protect sensitive information from potential tampering or destruction. The strategic timeline development required coordinating the various phases of legal action to maximize effectiveness while minimizing opportunities for opposition or delay tactics. The timeline needed to account for court scheduling requirements, evidence discovery periods, witness availability, and potential settlement negotiations that might resolve some issues without full litigation. The public relations preparation required developing communication strategies for managing media attention and community awareness that might result from high-profile legal proceedings involving inheritance fraud and family conflict. This preparation involved identifying potential spokespersons, developing key messaging about the importance of estate law enforcement, and establishing boundaries regarding public disclosure of family information. The preparation phase concluded with the development of a comprehensive action plan that coordinated all aspects of legal, financial, and personal preparation necessary for pursuing justice against my mother's criminal behavior. This plan provided the foundation for transforming moral outrage into effective legal action, while maintaining focus on the ultimate objectives of complete asset recovery and comprehensive accountability for inheritance fraud. The systematic approach to case preparation demonstrated how professional competence and strategic thinking could overcome the apparent advantages that criminal perpetrators possessed through their positions of trust and family relationships. The foundation of justice required meticulous attention to detail and comprehensive planning, but the strength of the evidence and the clarity of the legal violations provided confidence that justice would ultimately prevail over family favoritism and criminal deception. The morning of March 15th marked the end of deliberation and the beginning of decisive action that would irreversibly alter the trajectory of my family relationships and establish my commitment to pursuing justice regardless of personal cost. The comprehensive evidence compilation and strategic planning phases had provided the foundation necessary for confident action, but the moment of implementation required crossing a psychological threshold that would eliminate any possibility of retreat or accommodation. The formal initiation of legal proceedings began with my signature on a criminal complaint that would trigger law enforcement investigation into my mother's inheritance fraud, while simultaneously commencing civil litigation to recover the stolen assets and impose the penalties specified in my grandmother's codicil. The act of signing these documents represented more than procedural formality. It constituted a fundamental declaration of my refusal to accept criminal exploitation disguised as family financial management. Mrs. Thornfield had scheduled the filing for early morning to ensure that all documentation would be processed efficiently while providing maximum time for coordinating the various legal mechanisms that would follow the formal initiation of proceedings. The timing also minimized opportunities for my mother to take defensive actions or attempt to conceal additional evidence once she became aware of the legal challenge to her unauthorized activities. The criminal complaint detailed the systematic pattern of theft, forgery, and fiduciary misconduct that my mother had committed during her tenure as estate executor, providing law enforcement with comprehensive documentation of criminal violations that warranted immediate investigation and potential prosecution. The complaint included detailed financial analysis demonstrating the scope of unauthorized withdrawals, copies of forged distribution orders, and testimony from banking representatives who had processed the fraudulent transactions. The civil litigation filing included demands for complete restitution of stolen assets, payment of interest and penalties specified in the codicil, recovery of legal fees and court costs, immediate removal of my mother from her position as estate executor, and appointment of an independent administrator to complete proper estate distribution. The comprehensive nature of these demands reflected both the severity of her violations and my commitment to ensuring complete accountability for her criminal behavior. The coordination between criminal and civil proceedings required careful legal choreography that would maximize the effectiveness of both approaches while avoiding procedural conflicts that could delay justice or provide opportunities for opposition tactics. The evidence developed for criminal prosecution would support civil recovery efforts, while the civil proceedings would generate additional documentation that could strengthen criminal charges against my mother. The psychological transformation that accompanied this formal commitment to legal action involved accepting that the family relationships I had known throughout my life would be fundamentally altered by the process of holding my mother accountable for her criminal behavior. The comfortable illusions of family harmony and mutual support would be replaced by the uncomfortable reality of systematic exploitation and criminal deception that had operated under the guise of maternal authority. However, this transformation also involved recognizing that the family relationships I was potentially sacrificing had been built on deception and inequality rather than genuine mutual respect and fair treatment. The inheritance theft represented the culmination of decades of favoritism that had consistently prioritized my sister's immediate desires over long-term fairness and my legitimate rights as a family member and estate beneficiary. The strategic communication plan that accompanied the formal legal filings involved coordinating notifications to family members, professional colleagues, and relevant community members who needed to be informed about the situation in ways that would maintain my credibility while establishing clear boundaries regarding confidential information. This communication required balancing transparency about the criminal nature of my mother's behavior with appropriate discretion regarding sensitive family details. The notification to my father represented one of the most challenging aspects of this communication process, as his response would significantly influence the broader family dynamics that would shape the legal proceedings and their aftermath. His historical role as the family mediator and his investment in maintaining surface harmony suggested that he would likely oppose legal action even when faced with irrefutable evidence of criminal behavior. My conversation with Dad revealed the extent to which family members had become invested in denial and accommodation rather than acknowledging the serious nature of my mother's violations. His initial response focused on finding ways to resolve the situation privately rather than addressing the criminal implications of inheritance fraud or the necessity of holding perpetrators accountable for their actions. "Alexandra, I understand that you are upset about the money, but pursuing legal action against your mother will destroy our family," he said, his voice carrying the familiar tone of someone who prioritized conflict avoidance over justice and accountability. "Surely we can work out some arrangement that addresses your concerns without involving lawyers and courts in our family business." The characterization of inheritance fraud as family business that should be resolved privately revealed Dad's fundamental misunderstanding of both criminal law and the public nature of fiduciary violations that affect the integrity of estate administration systems. His suggestion that we could work out some arrangement demonstrated his assumption that criminal behavior could be resolved through family negotiations rather than legal accountability. My response to his concerns required articulating the broader implications of inheritance fraud while maintaining respect for his position as my father, despite his unwillingness to support justice and accountability. "Dad, Mom has committed multiple felonies that extend far beyond family disagreements about money. She has stolen nearly $90,000 through systematic fraud and forgery, and these crimes require legal consequences regardless of family relationships." The conversation with my father established clear boundaries regarding his role in the legal proceedings while offering him opportunities to support justice and accountability if he chose to prioritize legal integrity over family conflict avoidance. His ultimate decision would influence other family relationships, but would not affect my commitment to pursuing comprehensive remedies for the criminal violations that had occurred. The notification to Cassandra presented different challenges, as her potential complicity in the inheritance theft created legal and ethical complexities that extended beyond simple family communication. Her knowledge about the source of her wedding funding and her willingness to accept potentially stolen money would determine whether she could be treated as an innocent beneficiary or should be considered a co-conspirator in the criminal activity. My approach to communicating with Cassandra involved providing her with opportunities to demonstrate good faith by acknowledging the problematic nature of the wedding funding and expressing willingness to cooperate with efforts to recover stolen assets. Her response would determine whether our relationship could be preserved through the legal proceedings or whether her complicity in criminal activity would make reconciliation impossible. The conversation revealed the extent to which Cassandra had chosen willful ignorance over ethical responsibility regarding the source of her wedding funding. Her defensive response to questions about the inheritance money demonstrated either genuine ignorance about the criminal nature of the transactions or calculated denial designed to avoid accountability for accepting stolen assets. Alexandra, I did not know anything about problems with the inheritance money, she claimed, her voice carrying the uncertain tone of someone who had avoided asking questions that might produce uncomfortable answers. Mom told me that Grandma wanted the money to be used for my wedding, and I believed her because it seemed like something Grandma would want. The explanation revealed either stunning naivety about estate administration procedures or deliberate avoidance of obvious questions about the timing and source of the wedding funding. Cassandra's failure to verify the legitimacy of the inheritance distribution or question the unusual circumstances surrounding the funding suggested either intellectual limitations or moral flexibility that had enabled her complicity in criminal activity. My response to her explanation focused on providing opportunities for cooperation and restitution rather than pursuing additional legal action against her personally. Cassandra, regardless of what you knew about the source of the money, you have benefited from stolen assets that need to be returned to ensure proper estate distribution. Your cooperation with recovery efforts will determine whether you face additional legal consequences. The notification to Aunt Patricia provided crucial family support for the legal proceedings, while establishing important witness testimony about my grandmother's actual intentions regarding inheritance distribution. Her response demonstrated both outrage at my mother's criminal behavior and relief that someone was finally prepared to challenge the family dynamics that had enabled years of systematic exploitation. Alexandra, your grandmother specifically discussed her concerns about your mother's favoritism and her intention to modify the will to ensure fair treatment, Aunt Patricia confirmed during our phone conversation. She was worried that your mother would find ways to redirect inheritance money to Cassandra, and the codicil was designed to prevent exactly what has happened. The confirmation of my grandmother's prescient concerns about potential inheritance fraud provided powerful testimony that would support legal proceedings while demonstrating the calculated nature of my mother's criminal violations. Aunt Patricia's willingness to testify about these conversations would establish crucial evidence about the intended distribution of estate assets and the specific protections that my grandmother had attempted to implement. The professional notifications required informing key colleagues and supervisors about the family legal situation in ways that would maintain my credibility while preventing potential conflicts of interest related to my involvement in high-profile litigation. This communication involved balancing professional transparency with appropriate boundaries regarding confidential family information. The response from my professional network demonstrated strong support for my decision to pursue justice against inheritance fraud, with several colleagues expressing admiration for my courage in challenging criminal behavior despite the family relationships involved. The accounting profession's emphasis on financial integrity and legal compliance created an environment where pursuing justice against estate fraud was viewed as professionally commendable rather than personally vindictive. The point of no return had been reached through the formal filing of legal documents that initiated irreversible processes of criminal investigation and civil litigation. The comprehensive nature of the legal challenge meant that resolution would require either complete accountability for my mother's criminal behavior or definitive legal determination that her actions were somehow justified despite overwhelming evidence of systematic fraud and theft. The irrevocable choice represented more than a decision to pursue legal remedies for inheritance fraud. It constituted a fundamental commitment to prioritizing justice and accountability over family relationships built on deception and inequality. The transformation from accommodating victim to empowered advocate required accepting that true family loyalty sometimes demands holding members responsible for their criminal actions, rather than enabling continued violations through silence and accommodation. The foundation for justice had been established through comprehensive preparation and strategic planning, but the ultimate success of this endeavor would depend on maintaining courage and determination throughout the extended legal proceedings that would test both my resolve and my commitment to the principles that had motivated this difficult decision. The irrevocable choice had been made, and the pursuit of justice would continue regardless of opposition or emotional pressure from family members who preferred accommodation over accountability. The immediate aftermath of filing legal proceedings against my mother revealed the true nature of family relationships that had been carefully constructed to maintain appearances while concealing systematic patterns of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. Within 24 hours of the formal complaint being served, my phone began receiving a barrage of calls, text messages, and voicemails that demonstrated the coordinated response of family members who viewed my pursuit of justice as a betrayal of loyalty rather than a legitimate response to criminal behavior. The first call came from my mother herself, her voice alternating between feigned confusion and barely controlled rage as she attempted to characterize the legal proceedings as an inexplicable attack on family unity rather than accountability for documented criminal violations. Her approach revealed the sophisticated manipulation tactics that had enabled years of favoritism and financial misconduct, while maintaining the facade of maternal authority and family cohesion. "Alexandra, I cannot believe you would do this to our family over money," she began, her tone carefully modulated to convey wounded disappointment rather than acknowledgement of criminal wrongdoing. "Everything I did was for the good of our family, and I thought you would understand that Cassandra needed help more than you did. Your grandmother would be heartbroken to see you tearing our family apart over financial matters." The characterization of inheritance fraud as financial matters and the invocation of my grandmother's supposed disapproval revealed the fundamental dishonesty that had shaped my mother's approach to family relationships throughout my adult life. Her attempt to reframe systematic theft as family financial management demonstrated either genuine delusion about the nature of her actions or calculated manipulation designed to avoid accountability through emotional pressure. My response required maintaining professional composure while clearly articulating the criminal nature of her behavior and my commitment to pursuing justice regardless of family relationships or emotional manipulation. "Mom, you have stolen nearly $90,000 through systematic fraud and forgery, and these are serious crimes that require legal consequences. My grandmother's codicil specifically increased my inheritance because she was concerned about favoritism patterns, and her wishes will be honored through proper legal channels." The conversation deteriorated rapidly as my mother's facade of wounded maternal concern gave way to more direct threats and attempts at intimidation. Her true character emerged when faced with accountability for criminal behavior, revealing the calculating individual who had systematically exploited family relationships for personal and financial advantage while maintaining carefully constructed appearances of maternal devotion. "If you continue with this legal nonsense, you will lose your entire family," she warned, her voice carrying the edge of someone who had grown accustomed to achieving compliance through emotional blackmail and social pressure. "No one will want to associate with someone who destroys family relationships over money, and you will end up alone and bitter like those people who value dollars more than family love." The threat to isolate me from family relationships unless I abandoned pursuit of justice revealed the coercive dynamics that had enabled years of systematic favoritism and financial exploitation. My mother's approach demonstrated her understanding that family loyalty had been weaponized to protect criminal behavior while punishing victims who sought accountability and fair treatment. The response from extended family members revealed the effectiveness of my mother's manipulation tactics in mobilizing opposition to accountability and justice. Within hours of her initial call, I began receiving contact from aunts, uncles, and cousins who had been enlisted to pressure me into abandoning legal proceedings in favor of private family resolution that would protect the perpetrator while silencing the victim. My cousin Michael, who had maintained a close relationship with my mother throughout our adult lives, called to express his disappointment in my decision to pursue legal action against family members. His approach reflected the broader family culture that prioritized conflict avoidance over justice, while enabling systematic violations through collective denial and accommodation. Alexandra, I understand you are upset about the inheritance situation, but taking your mother to court is going to destroy relationships that have taken decades to build, he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who genuinely believed that family harmony required accepting criminal behavior without consequence. Surely there must be a way to work this out privately, without involving lawyers and making our family business public. The assumption that inheritance fraud could be resolved through private family negotiations revealed the extent to which criminal behavior had been normalized within our family system through years of accommodation and conflict avoidance. Michael's concern about making family business public demonstrated the priority placed on maintaining appearances rather than addressing underlying problems that had enabled systematic exploitation. My response to his concerns required explaining the legal and moral principles that made private resolution inappropriate for criminal violations, while maintaining respect for his position despite his unwillingness to support accountability. Michael, this situation involves multiple felonies that extend far beyond family disagreements about money. The crimes that have been committed require legal consequences, and private resolution would only enable continued violations against other potential victims. The conversation revealed that my decision to pursue justice had created a division within the extended family, between those who understood the necessity of legal accountability and those who prioritized family loyalty over criminal justice. This division would influence the social dynamics surrounding the legal proceedings while testing relationships that had been built on shared values versus those maintained through accommodation and compromise. The response from Cassandra demonstrated the extent to which she had internalized the family culture of avoiding accountability, while expecting others to accommodate her needs and desires regardless of fairness or legality. Her initial reaction, focused on the inconvenience that legal proceedings would create for her wedding plans, rather than acknowledging her complicity in accepting stolen inheritance money. Alexandra, you are ruining my wedding with this legal drama, she complained during a phone conversation that revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of both her legal exposure and her moral obligations regarding stolen assets. David and I have already made deposits and commitments based on the money Mom gave us, and now you are threatening to take it away just when we need it most. The characterization of inheritance fraud recovery as taking money away from her wedding demonstrated Cassandra's sense of entitlement to stolen assets while revealing her unwillingness to acknowledge the criminal nature of the funding she had received. Her focus on wedding logistics rather than legal consequences suggested either willful ignorance about the seriousness of the situation or calculated selfishness that prioritized personal convenience over justice and accountability. My response to her concerns required establishing clear expectations about asset recovery while providing opportunities for cooperation that might minimize her legal exposure. Cassandra, the money you received was stolen from my inheritance through criminal fraud, and it must be returned regardless of your wedding plans. Your cooperation with recovery efforts will determine whether you face additional legal consequences for accepting stolen assets. The professional response to my legal action proved more supportive than the family reaction, with colleagues and industry contacts expressing admiration for my courage in pursuing justice against inheritance fraud, despite the family relationships involved. The accounting profession's emphasis on financial integrity and legal compliance created an environment where challenging criminal behavior was viewed as professionally commendable rather than personally vindictive. Jennifer Martinez provided particularly valuable support during this initial phase, offering both professional advice about managing the litigation process and personal encouragement about the importance of holding perpetrators accountable for estate fraud. Her experience with similar cases provided perspective on the broader social implications of inheritance crime, while reinforcing my commitment to pursuing comprehensive justice. Alexandra, you are not just fighting for your own inheritance rights, but challenging a system that enables family financial abuse through emotional manipulation and social pressure, she explained during one of our regular consultation meetings. Your willingness to pursue legal accountability despite family opposition will help protect other potential victims who might face similar exploitation. The law enforcement response to the criminal complaint demonstrated the seriousness with which authorities treated inheritance fraud when supported by comprehensive documentation and professional analysis. Detective Sarah Reynolds, who was assigned to investigate the case, expressed appreciation for the thorough evidence compilation, while confirming that the criminal violations warranted immediate investigation and potential prosecution. Ms. Hamilton, this is one of the most well-documented cases of estate fraud that I have encountered, Detective Reynolds noted during our initial interview. Your professional analysis of the financial irregularities provides excellent foundation for criminal prosecution, and the evidence of systematic deception suggests that your mother may have committed similar violations in other contexts. The suggestion that my mother's criminal behavior might extend beyond my grandmother's estate raised disturbing possibilities about additional victims who might have been exploited through similar schemes. The detective's investigation would explore these broader implications while building the criminal case that would ensure accountability for the documented violations. The media attention that began to develop around the case reflected public interest in family inheritance disputes, while highlighting broader issues about estate fraud and fiduciary misconduct. Local news outlets contacted me for interviews about the legal proceedings, recognizing that the case involved important questions about family financial responsibility and legal accountability that extended beyond personal grievances. My approach to media communication required balancing transparency about the criminal nature of my mother's behavior with appropriate discretion regarding sensitive family details. The public attention provided opportunities to educate community members about inheritance fraud while maintaining focus on the legal and moral principles that justified my pursuit of justice. The social response within our community revealed divided opinions about family loyalty versus legal accountability, with some individuals expressing support for my courage in challenging criminal behavior, while others criticized my willingness to pursue legal action against family members. These reactions provided insight into broader cultural attitudes about family relationships and criminal justice that would influence public perception of the case. The initial consequences of legal action had exceeded my expectations in terms of both opposition from family members and support from professional colleagues, creating a complex social environment that would require careful navigation throughout the extended litigation process. The storm unleashed by my decision to pursue justice had revealed the true nature of relationships that had been carefully constructed to protect criminal behavior while silencing potential victims. The strength of the legal case and the comprehensiveness of the evidence documentation provided confidence that justice would ultimately prevail despite opposition and emotional pressure from family members who preferred accommodation over accountability. The initial action had established clear boundaries regarding my refusal to accept inheritance fraud, while demonstrating my commitment to pursuing comprehensive remedies, regardless of personal cost or family pressure. The transformation from accommodating family member to empowered advocate for justice had been tested through the immediate consequences of legal action, revealing both the challenges and opportunities that would shape the extended litigation process. The storm unleashed by challenging systematic family dysfunction would ultimately clear the way for relationships based on mutual respect and legal integrity, rather than accommodation and exploitation. The second week following the initiation of legal proceedings brought an intensification of family pressure tactics that revealed the sophisticated coordination between various relatives who had committed to protecting my mother from accountability. while attempting to force my withdrawal from legitimate legal action. The campaign to silence my pursuit of justice demonstrated the extent to which criminal behavior had been normalized within our family system through decades of accommodation and conflict avoidance that prioritized appearances over integrity. The most disturbing development involved my father's transformation from neutral mediator to active participant in efforts to undermine my legal case through emotional manipulation and financial pressure. His evolution from disappointed observer to hostile opponent revealed the fundamental commitment to protecting family dysfunction that had enabled years of systematic favoritism and exploitation disguised as parental authority and maternal devotion. Dad's approach involved leveraging shared family history and emotional connections to create guilt and shame about my decision to pursue legal accountability for criminal violations. His strategy focused on characterizing inheritance fraud as a family disagreement that required private resolution rather than legal intervention, deliberately misrepresenting the criminal nature of my mother's behavior while portraying my pursuit of justice as vindictive overreaction to financial disappointment. Alexandra, your mother has dedicated her entire life to supporting our family, and this legal attack will destroy her reputation and financial security over what amounts to a family misunderstanding about inheritance timing, he argued during a lengthy phone conversation designed to wear down my resolve through emotional exhaustion and guilt manipulation. Your grandmother would never have wanted her estate to become the source of permanent family division and public humiliation. The characterization of systematic theft and forgery as inheritance timing issues demonstrated the sophisticated denial that had enabled criminal behavior while protecting perpetrators from consequences. Dad's invocation of my grandmother's supposed preferences revealed his willingness to misrepresent the deceased's actual wishes, which had been clearly documented in the codicil that specifically anticipated and prohibited the exact violations that my mother had committed. My response required maintaining professional boundaries while addressing the emotional manipulation embedded in his arguments. Dad, the codicil explicitly includes penalties for executor interference precisely because Grandma anticipated these problems and wanted to ensure accountability. The legal proceedings are implementing her actual wishes, not violating them. And the criminal behavior documented in this case requires legal consequences regardless of family relationships. The conversation revealed that my father had been actively coordinating with my mother to develop strategies for pressuring my withdrawal from legal proceedings, while simultaneously working to discredit my evidence and undermine my credibility within professional and social networks. His transformation from family mediator to active opponent of justice demonstrated the depth of his investment in protecting dysfunction rather than supporting accountability. The extended family pressure campaign involved systematic contact from relatives who had been recruited to express disappointment in my decision while offering alternative resolution approaches that would protect my mother from criminal prosecution, while providing minimal compensation for my stolen inheritance. The coordination of these contacts suggested careful planning, designed to create sustained emotional pressure through multiple sources over extended periods. My Aunt Rebecca, who had maintained a distant but cordial relationship throughout our adult lives, called to express her concerns about the impact of legal proceedings on family relationships while proposing compromise solutions that would enable my mother to avoid criminal prosecution in exchange for partial restitution and promises of future behavioral modification. Alexandra, I understand that you feel wronged by the inheritance situation, but pursuing criminal charges against your mother will have consequences that extend far beyond your immediate family, she explained, her voice carrying the tone of someone who genuinely believed that criminal behavior could be resolved through family negotiations and emotional reconciliation. Perhaps we could arrange for your mother to repay some of the money over time, while avoiding the public embarrassment and legal costs associated with formal court proceedings. The proposal for partial restitution and promises of behavioral modification revealed fundamental misunderstanding of both criminal law and the psychological dynamics that enable systematic financial exploitation. The suggestion that inheritance fraud could be resolved through family payment plans demonstrated the extent to which criminal behavior had been normalized within our extended family system through accommodation and compromise that protected perpetrators while minimizing consequences. My response to her proposal required explaining the legal principles that made partial resolution inappropriate for criminal violations, while addressing the broader implications of inheritance fraud for other potential victims. Rebecca, the crimes that have been committed involve systematic deception and theft that cannot be resolved through family payment arrangements. Legal accountability serves important social purposes beyond individual compensation, and enabling criminal behavior through compromise would encourage similar violations against other families. The pressure campaign extended beyond direct family members to include family friends and community acquaintances who had been enlisted to express concerns about my approach, while reinforcing narratives about family loyalty and conflict resolution that prioritized accommodation over accountability. These contacts revealed the social networks that my mother had cultivated throughout her adult life, which now served as resources for protecting her from consequences while isolating me from traditional sources of support and validation. Mrs. Patterson, a longtime family friend who had maintained relationships with multiple generations of our family, contacted me to express her disappointment in my decision to pursue legal action while sharing her perspective on appropriate approaches to family financial disputes. Her involvement demonstrated how family dysfunction had been protected through community relationships that prioritized maintaining appearances over addressing underlying problems. Alexandra, I have known your family for over 30 years, and your mother has always been devoted to her children and family welfare, she argued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who viewed lengthy relationship history as qualification for mediating complex legal and ethical disputes. This legal situation seems like an overreaction to family financial decisions that were made with good intentions, even if the execution was not perfect. The characterization of systematic criminal fraud as family financial decisions with imperfect execution revealed how community relationships had been leveraged to normalize and protect criminal behavior through emotional appeals and social pressure. Mrs. Patterson's intervention demonstrated the broader social dynamics that enable inheritance fraud by discouraging victims from pursuing legitimate legal remedies in favor of accommodation and compromise. My response to her concerns required maintaining respect for her relationship history, while clearly articulating the criminal nature of my mother's behavior and the necessity of legal accountability. Mrs. Patterson, I appreciate your concern for our family, but the situation involves documented criminal violations, including theft and forgery, that require legal consequences. These are not family financial decisions, but serious crimes that affect the integrity of estate administration systems. The workplace pressure tactics represented a particularly sophisticated aspect of the campaign to force my withdrawal from legal proceedings through professional intimidation and social isolation. My mother had contacted several of my professional colleagues and business associates to share her version of the family conflict, while characterizing my legal action as vindictive overreaction that reflected poorly on my judgment and professional competence. The approach involved subtle questioning of my professional credibility, while suggesting that my involvement in family legal disputes might create conflicts of interest or ethical concerns that could affect my career advancement and client relationships. These contacts were designed to create professional anxiety that would motivate my withdrawal from legal proceedings in favor of private family resolution that would protect my mother from accountability. My supervisor, Janet Morrison, approached me with concerns that had been raised by an anonymous contact regarding my involvement in high-profile family litigation that might affect my professional reputation and the firm's client relationships. Her diplomatic approach reflected genuine concern for my welfare, while revealing the effectiveness of my mother's strategy for creating professional pressure through indirect channels. Alexandra, I have complete confidence in your professional competence and ethical standards, but I wanted to make you aware that someone has contacted our office with concerns about your involvement in family legal proceedings, she explained, During a private meeting designed to address potential conflicts while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. I want to ensure that you have the support necessary to handle any challenges that might arise from your personal legal situation. The conversation provided an opportunity to explain the criminal nature of my mother's behavior, while demonstrating how pursuit of justice against inheritance fraud actually reinforced, rather than compromised, my professional commitment to financial integrity and legal compliance. Janet's response revealed strong support for my decision to pursue accountability while offering institutional resources to protect against professional retaliation. The financial pressure tactics involved attempts to make the litigation process prohibitively expensive through procedural challenges and delay strategies designed to exhaust my resources while creating incentives for settling the case on terms favorable to my mother. These tactics revealed understanding of the economic dynamics that often enable criminal behavior by making justice financially inaccessible to victims with limited resources. My mother's attorney, David Steinberg, initiated a series of procedural motions and discovery requests that appeared designed to increase litigation costs while delaying resolution of the substantive criminal and civil claims. His strategy reflected standard approaches for protecting clients from accountability through economic warfare that makes justice too expensive for victims to pursue effectively. Mrs. Thornfield's response to these tactics involved developing counter-strategies that would minimize costs while maintaining momentum toward comprehensive resolution of both criminal and civil aspects of the case. Her experience with similar cases provided valuable guidance about managing litigation expenses while preventing opponents from achieving delay and exhaustion objectives. Ms. Hamilton, these delay tactics are common in estate fraud cases where perpetrators attempt to exhaust victims' resources rather than addressing the substantive criminal violations, she explained during our strategy meeting. However, the codicil provisions that require your mother to pay legal fees and penalties will ultimately cover most litigation expenses, making these tactics counterproductive for her defense. The psychological pressure intensified through sustained contact designed to create emotional exhaustion and self-doubt about my decision to pursue legal accountability for criminal behavior. The coordination of these efforts revealed sophisticated understanding of the psychological dynamics that enable criminal behavior by creating isolation and emotional distress that motivate victims to abandon legitimate legal remedies. The campaign included repeated contact from family members expressing disappointment and concern, while offering alternative resolution approaches that would protect my mother from prosecution while providing minimal compensation and no meaningful accountability. The repetitive nature of these contacts was designed to create decision fatigue and emotional exhaustion that would motivate compromise and accommodation. However, the sustained pressure also revealed the desperation of family members who understood that comprehensive legal accountability would expose decades of systematic dysfunction while establishing precedents for holding perpetrators responsible for criminal behavior. Their investment in protecting my mother from consequences demonstrated the extent to which criminal violations had been normalized through accommodation and denial. The siege of silence represented a comprehensive effort to isolate me from support, while creating overwhelming pressure to abandon pursuit of justice in favor of accommodation that would protect criminal behavior while maintaining family dysfunction. The sophistication of these tactics revealed the resources and coordination available to protect perpetrators while silencing victims through social and emotional manipulation. The strength of my legal case and the comprehensiveness of the evidence documentation provided foundation for maintaining commitment to accountability despite escalating opposition and pressure. The professional support from colleagues and law enforcement reinforced the legitimacy of my pursuit of justice, while demonstrating that challenging criminal behavior represented principled action rather than vindictive overreaction to family disappointment. The third week of legal proceedings brought an unexpected transformation in the dynamics surrounding my pursuit of justice, as individuals and institutions that had previously remained silent began to emerge as powerful advocates for accountability and legal integrity. These developments demonstrated that systematic challenges to criminal behavior could inspire broader support from communities and professionals who recognize the importance of maintaining ethical standards and protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation. The most significant development occurred when Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a prominent estate planning attorney who had practiced in our community for over 20 years, contacted Mrs. Thornfield to offer pro bono assistance with the legal proceedings. Her involvement brought both additional expertise and professional credibility that would strengthen the case while reducing the financial burden associated with complex litigation against coordinated opposition. Dr. Hernandez had encountered similar cases of inheritance fraud throughout her career and recognized the broader implications of my situation for the integrity of estate administration systems. Her decision to provide assistance reflected both professional commitment to protecting beneficiary rights and recognition that comprehensive accountability in high-profile cases could establish important precedents for deterring similar criminal behavior. Ms. Hamilton, your case represents exactly the type of systematic inheritance fraud that undermines public confidence in estate administration while enabling financial exploitation of vulnerable family members, Dr. Hernandez explained. During our initial consultation meeting, the evidence you have compiled demonstrates professional competence and ethical commitment that deserves comprehensive legal support, and I am honored to contribute my expertise to ensuring that justice prevails. Her involvement brought immediate, strategic advantages through her extensive experience with estate fraud cases and her established relationships with judges, prosecutors, and other legal professionals who would be involved in the proceedings. Her reputation for ethical practice and professional excellence provided credibility that would be difficult for opposition attorneys to challenge or undermine. The support from Dr. Hernandez also included access to a network of forensic accountants, estate administration experts, and legal investigators who could provide additional evidence and testimony to strengthen the case. Her resources effectively countered the delay tactics and procedural challenges that my mother's attorney had employed to increase litigation costs and create pressure for unfavorable settlement arrangements. The second major development involved Detective Sarah Reynolds' investigation expanding beyond the immediate criminal violations to include examination of other potential victims who might have been exploited through similar schemes. Her investigation revealed that my mother had served as executor for 2 other estates during the previous 5 years, both involving elderly relatives whose beneficiaries had accepted distributions without thorough verification of the amounts or timing. The discovery of potential additional victims transformed the case from an isolated family dispute into a pattern of systematic criminal behavior that warranted comprehensive investigation and prosecution. Detective Reynolds coordinated with prosecutors to develop charges that would reflect the full scope of my mother's criminal activity while providing justice for all affected families. Ms. Hamilton, your courage in pursuing legal accountability has enabled us to identify and investigate other families who may have been victimized by similar inheritance fraud schemes, Detective Reynolds explained during our case update meeting. The evidence you provided has been instrumental in developing broader criminal charges that will ensure comprehensive accountability for systematic financial exploitation. The expanded investigation revealed that my mother had stolen approximately $150,000 from the 3 estates she had administered, demonstrating a pattern of criminal behavior that extended far beyond the violations against my grandmother's estate. The systematic nature of these crimes supported charges of organized financial fraud that carried significantly more severe penalties than isolated theft violations. The involvement of additional victims also provided powerful testimony about the psychological manipulation and family pressure tactics that had enabled the criminal behavior while silencing potential complainants through emotional coercion and social isolation. These testimonies reinforced the broader social implications of inheritance fraud while demonstrating the courage required to challenge systematic exploitation disguised as family financial management. The third significant development involved the emergence of professional support from unexpected sources within the accounting and financial planning communities. Several colleagues who had initially remained neutral about the family legal situation began to recognize the professional implications of challenging inheritance fraud and offered various forms of assistance and encouragement. Robert Chen, a certified public accountant who specialized in estate and trust taxation, contacted me to express his admiration for my pursuit of justice while offering to provide expert testimony about standard estate administration practices and the criminal nature of the violations that had occurred. His involvement brought additional professional credibility while reinforcing the technical aspects of the financial analysis that supported the legal proceedings. Alexandra, your professional competence in documenting these criminal violations has set a standard for how inheritance fraud should be investigated and prosecuted, he explained during our consultation meeting. The accounting profession benefits when members demonstrate the courage to challenge financial crimes, even when committed by family members, because it reinforces our commitment to ethical standards and legal compliance. His offer to provide expert testimony would strengthen the technical aspects of the case, while educating judges and juries about the sophisticated methods used to commit inheritance fraud through manipulation of estate administration processes. His professional reputation and expertise would make it difficult for opposition attorneys to challenge the financial evidence or minimize the criminal nature of the violations. The fourth major development involved unexpected support from community organizations that had become aware of the case through media coverage and recognized its importance for protecting elderly individuals and their families from financial exploitation. The Elder Rights Alliance, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing financial abuse of senior citizens, contacted Mrs. Thornfield to offer resources and advocacy support for the legal proceedings. The organization's involvement brought both additional resources and broader community awareness about the prevalence of inheritance fraud and the importance of holding perpetrators accountable for criminal behavior. Their support helped transform the case from a personal family dispute into a community effort to protect vulnerable individuals from systematic financial exploitation. Margaret Foster, the executive director of the Elder Rights Alliance, explained, their decision to support the case during a public meeting about inheritance fraud prevention. Ms. Hamilton's courage in pursuing legal accountability for inheritance fraud demonstrates the kind of individual action that protects entire communities from financial exploitation. Her case will establish important precedents for holding perpetrators responsible while encouraging other victims to seek justice. The organization's involvement included providing educational resources about inheritance fraud prevention, connecting me with other families who had experienced similar violations, and advocating for stronger legal protections for estate beneficiaries. Their support helped address the social isolation that had been created by family pressure tactics while demonstrating broader community investment in justice and accountability. The fifth significant development involved recognition from legal education institutions that viewed the case as an important example of how professional competence and ethical commitment could enable individuals to challenge systematic criminal behavior effectively. The law school at our state university contacted Mrs. Thornfield to request permission to use the case as a teaching example for students studying estate law and criminal justice. Professor James Mitchell, who taught estate planning and administration law, explained the educational value of the case during a meeting with Mrs. Thornfield and me. This case demonstrates how thorough documentation and professional analysis can overcome the apparent advantages that criminal perpetrators possess through family relationships and positions of trust. The evidence compilation and legal strategy serve as excellent examples for students who will encounter similar cases in their professional practice. The academic interest in the case provided additional validation for the legal approach, while creating opportunities for broader professional education about inheritance fraud prevention and prosecution. The law school's involvement would help ensure that future attorneys would be better prepared to recognize and address similar criminal violations while supporting victims who sought justice and accountability. The sixth development involved unexpected support from members of the religious community who had become aware of the case through pastoral counseling and social service networks. Several clergy members recognized the moral dimensions of inheritance Fraud and the importance of supporting individuals who sought justice despite family pressure and social opposition. Reverend Thomas Anderson, who had counseled families experiencing financial conflicts throughout his ministry, offered spiritual support and guidance while publicly advocating for the importance of holding family members accountable for criminal behavior. His involvement brought moral authority and community respect that reinforced the ethical dimensions of the legal proceedings. Miss Hamilton's pursuit of justice demonstrates the kind of moral courage that our faith communities should celebrate and support, he explained during a sermon about family responsibility and ethical behavior. True family love requires holding members accountable for their actions, while protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation and abuse. The religious community support helped address the spiritual and emotional dimensions of the family conflict while providing alternative perspectives on family loyalty that prioritized accountability over accommodation. This support was particularly valuable for countering the emotional manipulation that had characterized family pressure tactics throughout the legal proceedings. The seventh major development involved recognition from financial industry organizations that viewed the case as an important example of how professional expertise could be leveraged to combat financial crimes and protect consumer interests. The National Association of Personal Financial Advisors contacted me to request permission to feature the case in their professional development materials about inheritance fraud prevention. The industry recognition provided additional validation for the professional approach to documenting and prosecuting inheritance fraud, while creating opportunities for broader education about the criminal violations that could occur during estate administration. The association's involvement would help ensure that financial professionals would be better prepared to recognize and address similar violations while supporting clients who had been victimized by inheritance fraud. The emergence of these unexpected allies and sources of support transformed the dynamics of the legal proceedings from an isolated family dispute into a comprehensive community effort to protect vulnerable individuals from financial exploitation while holding perpetrators accountable. For criminal behavior, the strength of this support network provided both practical resources and emotional encouragement that enabled sustained commitment to justice despite ongoing family pressure and opposition. The transformation demonstrated that individual courage in challenging systematic criminal behavior could inspire broader community support and professional recognition that reinforced the importance of accountability and legal integrity. The unexpected champions of justice who emerged throughout the legal proceedings validated the decision to pursue comprehensive legal remedies while providing the resources necessary to ensure successful prosecution and recovery. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.